Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And well, we're starting to get a little bit more news when it comes to EVE Online, even some development that's happening. So I think it's pretty cool. Let's get started with, there's two dev blogs basically, or articles that really stood out for me over the last week. Actually dropped pretty late, but the first one is changes to resources. That's pretty big in my opinion. We are getting new ores that should give us new sources for specifically Megasite, Zydrine, also Isogen, and then Pyrite, to my surprise. But that's what they're going with. And what I really thought was interesting about it is the reason why CCP mentioned in the article as to adding these resources. It was specifically to address bottlenecks now that large and capital ship production is going up. So that's pretty unusual, I would say. Back in the old days, this would take like maybe an expansion or a patch to do a change like this. Now it's more of an on-the-fly announcement. Hey, there's these stars where, well, the Amar did something with Triglavian tech. We know that it's the type that the Triglavians like, and turns out now all of a sudden we're finding new resources there, and this will basically be made available to the capsuleers, and you'll be able to mine them out. So what this to me means or feels like is that CCP is actively willing to do something or to tweak the resources depending on what they're seeing happening in game. Now we know that eventually they want to go to like a fully dynamic resource system where basically they don't have to manually tweak stuff, but the system can handle that itself. But yeah, they're even at the moment they are willing to take a look at what's happening and intervene if they, for instance, see that Megasite and Zydrine are going completely bonkers to really high prices. So that's actually pretty important to remember as well when we're looking at EVE Talk and when we are trading. But I'm also kind of thinking ahead a little bit. If they do this dynamic system, I kind of wonder how they'll handle this very specific situation where they're seeing there's a lot more activity than what we thought. There's a lot more capital ships being produced. They need more resources. We need to make them available. And so I'm sort of thinking eventually, of course, if there's like a very big organized group in a certain region, they'll basically start to deplete their resources, right? Which is part of don't want to get that ultimate fortress and nobody can ever assail us, that type of deal. But I then wonder if they'll like spread out the other countering resources, you could say, or if they'll like put them in the bordering regions so that an enemy that wants to challenge those guys actually has an incentive to go into those border regions, and so does the alliance itself, of course. It's a very tricky situation, but we will of course see what CCP comes up with. But for me, this is like a sign that they're really thinking about the dynamic system, but they're also starting to look at what do we have to do, for instance, when production goes up across the board and the available resources just aren't enough, which I think they sort of admitted to was the problem for Megasite and for Zydrine. The other dev blog then was about the faction warfare update, and here basically the same message, you could say, because they are looking at, well, the rewards, the respawn rates, the availability, the accessibility, and all of that stuff for the faction warfare changes and the new system. They of course did mention that well, it's very active, it's new, so it's very active. That's maybe kind of normal, but that there's also a more balanced, fair playing field where one side doesn't just completely dominate everything. There are now avenues for even a weaker enemy to make it harder for those that are overwhelming them. So that's pretty good. And of course, they reiterated that in Q1 2023, they're planning to do an allegiance system so that you don't have to leave your corporation or your alliance in order to take part in faction warfare, which is something that I'm definitely looking forward to as well. And those were for me the two main news items of interest, and that could have an impact on the market, of course. Before we do that, we'll take a quick look at the New Eden store. I thought I saw a mail on a sale happening as well, but here I'm not seeing any sale tags, any special tags or anything like that. And on the services front, no, just the packages, but nothing special. Then we get to move on to the market. Let's start with pilot services, of course, coming in at 5 minutes. There we go. Let's get to that plex chart, and you may already have spotted it on the ticker as well. Very interesting here. A little bit of decline on the average prices. You can see that we are now scraping the bottom range of the prices, and at the high points just touching 5 million, but are having a very hard time breaking through this. This does feel like a little bit of a different dynamic. Sort of warned about this a little bit as well, I think, in the last ETH talk. We got a nice little boost here in activity, in volumes after the expansion. Players coming back, you get 7 days Omega, you do pull some people over, but here in December there's definitely some steep competition, and interest might just be dropping a little bit. We are talking just below 5 million for the sellers in JITA, 4.8 million for the buyers. There is still definitely buyers in there. I think traders are always on the lookout for cheap plex, so that pressure just never stops. Nothing too special to report in the Tranquility Trading Tower. Same thing for the buyers. They're in there, but they're heavily competing with JITA 4.4 itself. The multiple pilot trading certificates then, sort of a little bit of the same thing, definitely declining or stopping the recovery from that big sale. And you can see here the big sale with the massive volumes, but we are clearly also going down in the volumes at the moment as prices reach basically the high point, or the same point you could say as what you would expect for plex. 1.9 billion for the sellers, going up to 2 billion on the front page, 1.75 billion, a little bit more margin than in plex itself, but of course volumes are completely tiny compared to plex, and so this is normal. You need a bit more spread when it's not being traded that often. The skill extractors then are doing something very similar to plex, of course. That is to be expected, but you can very clearly see here preparation for the expansion, big volumes. This is not a sale because prices went up. Then we get our plateau here in November. New stuff to do, new stuff to explore, lots of interest, and then a couple of other games dropped their bombs on us, so we got a little bit of a decline here. Volumes clearly going down, but prices staying pretty stable in the last week or so. 570 million for the sellers, 551 for the buyers. So there is this narrow margin. There is definitely this interest still, this demand that exists in the game, and I think a lot of players are a little bit in the same situation as me. Sure, this is nice. I got another daily routine to get my alliance logos, to get all of that stuff done, but bring us that allegiance system. That's when we're hoping for some real, extra activity, that basically for those that didn't want to leave their alliances or fully commit to a faction warfare lifestyle, so that they have that option then as well. It sounds really interesting. I think it has a lot of potential. Of course, we are eagerly awaiting details on what CCP is planning to do. Impact on the injectors then. Here are the large scale injectors that went back above 900 million, but are also, I think, now starting to suffer from declining volumes, a little bit of pressure on the price. Are we still above 900 for the sellers? Yeah, 915 million for the sellers, 861 for the buyers though. A little bit of margin opening up here, I think, from buyers not willing to go and play in the 900 million ranges. Small scale injectors, I don't think will be able to really counter that momentum, so they just never broke above the 190 million, so they don't have to go down, but you can again see pretty big decline in volumes over the last 4 or 5 days. 185 million, 186 for the sellers, 172 for the buyers. Same story here. I think a little bit of margin opening up. We're closing in on that 10%, but it is because buyers are not willing to go to these crazy high prices. Yeah, they're dropping out a little bit. Then we finally have the daily alpha injectors that are even slightly declining over the last week. That's definitely coming in as a little bit of a surprise to me personally. 48 for the sellers, 43 for the buyers. I would say for the alpha players, look at that spread as well here. So actually, now that we're looking at the spread, it's again buyers that are trying to drop the price down just by saying, yeah, we're not going to play that game here. We want our reasonable prices. And for alpha players that, still have characters that can be boosted through the daily alpha injector, this is of course a very nice place to be, comparing this to the 70 million we had just in September, and of course adding in the real life costs that have gone up substantially. So really surprising how stable this is. I thought we would see a faster and faster cycle of CCP having to intervene for crazy high prices for daily alpha injectors, but now we had that plateau, and here 1.5 months in, we're actually still slowly declining. Then finally, we've got the hypercores that are, well, a little bit hesitating here at the tail end as well. Volume still doing really well, so the gamblers are still in full swing and using their hypercores. 525,000 to 515,000 demand here also very, very high. Yeah, pretty interesting to see, but of course it is on the one hand a unique item for a very niche part of the game. On the other hand, it is something that is traded directly from CCP, so the inflation expectations I think are somewhat reflected in this one as well. And yeah, here we just basically don't really know which way things are gonna go. Next up, we've got the minerals at 1050. Could be interesting, of course, because of the announcement from CCP, so especially pyrite, megasite, zydrine and isogen could be hit by this announcement. It should mean more supply, so it should mean lower prices for those minerals. But you may already noticed on the ticker that megasite has basically shrugged this off. But let's get started. Here is the titanium market that's holding on really well to the gains that they've made over the last couple of weeks, which, well, I think we now have a strong indication that a big part of this is indeed capital ship manufacturing. They did at one point in a big patch decrease the need for titanium across the board. So basically I think this was CCP telling us 7.8 is for titanium. No, we're not too happy with that. 4.5 is maybe a little bit more in line with what we expect. And so for this week we're at 4.42 for the sellers, 4.36 for the buyers. You can see that narrow margin, you can see that relatively strong demand, but at the same time you can see that it is the most ubiquitous high-SiC mineral, so hundreds of millions of units are being brought in single batches. There is plenty of supply to keep us within this current range at the moment, and this despite the fact that apparently other minerals are clear bottlenecks to CCP that required intervention, like this one, to my surprise, pyrite. Now this is a crazy min-max here, so we're not going to really be able to show the chart unless I do something like this, but I think once it's in here, once I open it up like this, oh no, there we go, that's actually a little bit better, still not great. But we went above 10 ISK here. We actually went above 12.5 when the expansion hit and everyone wanted to start producing lots of stuff, including the new ships, of course. And since then we've slowly been declining, so I personally am a little bit surprised that CCP is coming in with a new source for pyrite. We're talking 1075 for the sellers, 1050 for the buyers. Again, that narrow margin is there, but look at the volumes, 85 million, 125 million here, so you get a 50 to 100 million that's easily doable. Buyers are in much smaller batches, so I didn't see that bottleneck, but we will of course have to wait and see on what CCP actually, where the CCP decides to put them, what the actual volumes are, all of that stuff. I haven't looked into that just yet, but it was on the list. And then one that is not, and that historically actually has been a real bottleneck as well, but perhaps here CCP is willing to give high-SiC miners the one mineral that's actually a little bit more juicy. It is Mexalon, of course. We had a price of 80 again in preparation. Yeah, that's a little bit too early to say in preparation for the expansion, but you can see that it can quickly become a bottleneck in those null-SiC industries, and as a result we do have a little bit more of violent swings going from 60 to 80, 90 ISK even. In a short period of time, and then suppliers do of course spot this opportunity, so that pressure comes back in here. We're back below 70 for Mexalon, 66.5 for the sellers, 64 for the buyers. Again, narrow margin that is definitely there. You had one big seller coming in at 69 here with like 300 million units, but other than that it is not that easy to get more than 10 million is in a single batch. Buyers though are here a little bit more in line with what can be produced by the market. So I think here we do also have a supply demand side of the equation on the volumes that shows we should be decently okay with Mexalon. And then we've got Isogen that has reacted here to the announcement of the new sources, which I think is very understandable. One of the major reasons why we have a 5x on the chart, on a 1-year chart here for Isogen from 100 to 500, is because it went completely into a low-SEC source. Low-SEC is the most dangerous space in EVE Online. And then to me this is again a little bit of a surprise, although comparing Isogen to Noxium and then doing the same on the volumes per like cubic meters and things like that, I do think Isogen was becoming very expensive. On the other hand, we still have those big sellers that are lying in wait. We know that there's still 60 million here, 100 million here, but perhaps despite what's being brought to the market here and there, CCP will have the full numbers, and that this might also be confirmation that those old reserves, those old Isogen stockpiles are really starting to be depleted, and they're seeing the writing on the wall that when it is active supply versus active demand, you gotta go to low sec, and that's a very tricky proposition. So perhaps a little bit more supply will be needed for Isogen in order to keep things in check, and in order to keep the ambitions of players that want those large ships, those carriers, those dreadnought fleets, etc., to be able to, for them to do this in at least a somewhat reasonable way. Now, Isogen was the, in my opinion, the largest casualty of the good old resource bonanza that we were there when we had those capital miners in nullsec that could mine the same as 8 hulks and crazy stuff like that. And this one went like from really pretty damn valuable, it was a low sec mineral, into something that was worth absolutely nothing. We got huge stockpiles, and so I think from all the minerals, this is the last one that might still have those stockpiles, and we might just be finally at the point where we are really CSP is seeing that we're getting through to the last bit of Isogen, the last big batches of Isogen, and if we don't intervene now, we're up for even higher prices than here. But yeah, the reaction is here. Let's go take a look at it. 490 for the sellers, 455 for the buyers, and this when we finally really went above the 500, touched 600 disc, and then on the announcement, I guess we start declining. It will probably be together with some supplies, although get a look at that here, 10 million, 6 million. These are the largest orders to bring us down from a 500. So let's see if there's anything. Well, we touched 600, so there's 20 million that came in here. That's still pretty substantial. Here's another 100 million. That's a couple of days old. So we must have bumped into some stuff and maybe even rolled over some stuff as well here on these high volumes. But kind of also still in line with my prediction that we will start to see Isogen move in a more healthy market dynamic with upsides and downsides that can actually happen to the prices. And then I think basically again the spread here was a little bit too thin. We were getting to 600 disc for Isogen with Noxium here. That's probably already in that situation where it is active supply demand that is dictating the price, and Noxium is going for 937 to 912. I think even historically Isogen being like 2/3 of the price of Noxium was a little bit, is definitely very expensive Isogen on the books there. And then we're going to nullsec. Here is the Zydrine chart. Well, at least we're trying to make a plateau, but we're still above 3000 discs. So nullsec is saying we need a lot of Zydrine. Those minerals, those new ores better be very juicy. But until we know for sure, we are not moving at all. 3080 for the sellers, almost 3000 is for the buyers. Buyers perhaps anticipating a little bit, trying to open up that gap just a little bit by not bumping straight into those sell prices. But for Megasite, same story. We're forming a top, but we are basically still stuck at the highest range of the year. This is from 600 to 3000, another 5x here on the chart. It's down to 2.8 though, so we're losing maybe a little bit of ground here, just below 2.8 for the sellers, 2.7 for the buyers, or below that. So they're maybe kind of hesitant, but at the moment basically they've got no choice. They have to pay the price for those nullsec minerals. I'm guessing because, well, in nullsec is where a lot of production is happening and they have direct access to those stockpiles. There's not a lot left for JITA. Finally, we've got the Morphite chart that's actually going below the 40,000 disc, just recovering at the tail end here, but 41 for the sellers and 39 for the buyers. Basically in on the 1 year chart, at least relatively cheap Morphites. I'll give you guys the historical perspective. I used to invest in Morphite, buy batches of Morphite when it went below 10,000 disk. Those were the good old days. Oh, but I forgot to mention that. That's actually really silly of me, because there's another part of resources that CCP actually touched on, which is that moon mining yields will be cut by 25%. Pretty substantial nerf, but we'll get to that when we reach advanced moon materials and then the Take 2 ships. First, we have PI coming in at 2015. There we go. Let's get started. Here are the broadcast nodes, and broadcast nodes are coming back down to a more average price, heading for the 1.5 million. Still 1.7 for the sellers and 1.6 for the buyers, so we still have a little bit of a premium here, but the good times across the PI spectrum, I think we speculated on that throughout the last couple of months. Why are things going so well? Well, because Nullsec is making lots of dreadnoughts, lots of carriers, lots of big ships, and well, the new aspect for producing those is one of the new aspects is you also need PI, and specifically advanced PI materials, and this is now also a lever that CCP has to try and differentiate to make some ships a little bit cheaper, etc. But the general vibe that I am starting to get here, which, I mean, it's sort of understandable as well, but it does take away perhaps a little bit from the sandbox, is that CCP is more and more willing to become an intervening factor within the sandbox in order to, well, get the results that they want. We'll see how that works out, of course. Let's continue. Here are our construction blocks, and you can see that we are still doing very well. Well, if even CCP comes out and confirms that the factories for large ships are doing overtime, then we can expect here a 10,500 going to 11,000 very quickly for the sellers, and almost 10,000 disk for the buyer of construction blocks. Very high prices on the 1-year chart. Coolants is actually stalling at 10,000 disk, but let's remember, coolants is tied to fuels, and it's also super easy to produce on gas planets. And so for coolants to go for 10,000 for the sellers, 9,900 for the buyers, that number one shows very strong demand, and is actually a really good price for coolants. Even historically speaking, this is a great price. I sell without a second thought when I can get 10k for my coolants. Enriched uranium then, really nice as well, of course, not a 1-year high point, but 15k, 50% extra over coolants, kind of crazy. 12,000 for the sellers, 11,000 for the buyers. More normal margin. We are not going to even higher prices, but it is very expensive. Then we've got our integrity response drones, easily another week above 2.5 million, showing that strong demand. 2.7 for the sellers, 2.6 and above for the buyers. Narrow margin. Everyone, or at least the big groups, want and need that. PI and mechanical parts is building another high point right here, up from well above 10,000 disk and now 12,300 on a lack of supply, 11,000 for the buyers. Yeah, if you have the opportunity, it's really easy. Barren planets, build mechanical parts, super easy, and you're getting really good prices for that. Miniature electronics getting close to a 1-year high point yet again as well. 13,000 for a refined PI material, 12, and despite that, despite this being like the most expensive in the list so far, 30% above what would be a normal price for a refined from an historical perspective. We've got 12,800 disk for the buyers. They are just bumping right into that, desperate for these resources. Nano factories losing a little bit of ground. So I did mention that I saw some signs that a little bit less demand is starting to peak in. And this again, to me, might be because of, well, the World of Warcraft expansion. Now this week we just got the new leak for Path of Exile that started just yesterday, in fact, and yeah, I just put in my first 3-4 hours right after league launch up until 1 in the morning. It's a lot of fun, I have to say, and so I do think this will have an impact. We have to, honestly, if we want to play the market, keep all factors in mind, not shy away from mentioning something like that. And so nano factories below 900,000 again for the sellers, but the good news, 820 for the buyers, 864 for the first seller. That is just a super narrow margin yet again, showing that the demand is there, but can we go even higher? That may be a difficult proposition. Then we've got organic motor applicators, and this may be one sign that, yeah, the problems were stuff like Megasite Zydrine that were becoming too expensive, because here, despite falling to 700,000 disc, full recovery in just 10 days, and we are back at 840 for the sellers and 820 for the buyers. Again, that desperation for the resources is really starting to show up here. Recursive computing modules back to a high point as well, 1.3 million to 1.2 million, same story. And then our robotics, I love this, and I mentioned this, that once we really get to the 100,000 for robotics, I will be looking at PI to maybe start producing that myself, because you can't do this on one planet, even in HiSec. I think that's a really cool concept, but it needs to be worth it. There we go. Just below that, 99,990 for the first seller, but 100,000 definitely come into play. Buyers, they've got no choice. 90k as well for the buyers of robotics. So I mentioned a couple of weeks ago as well that I sold almost all of my PI. Well, looks like I may have been a little bit early as well. Rocket fuel still able to go for 13,000 for the sellers, and then here 13,000 for the buyers basically as well. That's really nice. Then our self-harmonizing power cores have to give up on the 225 on the chart. We're still there for the sellers, but again a narrow margin here, so I don't see a crash just yet. Smart fab units not able to get to 100 just yet, but 80,000, 84,000 come into play quickly. 73,000 for the buyers. The difference with robotics, you can see here how much larger and more consistent the volumes are. Smart fab units, they've got days when we trade hardly any. That means that there is definitely a different market here, and it's tougher for this one to make its way to 100,000. On the other hand, just a reasonable number of buying could bring us there as well. The volatility potential here is much higher. Then we've got sterile conduits still holding on quite nicely, I would say, well above 1.2 million for the sellers, just below 1.2 million for the buyers. Next here are our supercomputers, just below 100,000 disk. 88,000 for the buyers. That's actually still a very good price, especially again on the 1-year chart. You can see how much we've gained. Synthetic oil, another 1-year high point at 12,000, 11,000 for the buyers. Our synapses easily defending 111, 110, 95,000 for the buyers. So these two are tied to implants in part, so that's why they already have that 100k handle that they can ask for. 87 for the buyers, a little bit of drop here in the buyers, but I would still say a great price. And then the one that for me is a real sign that things are different here, water-cooled CPU in December right now, rising to close to a 1-year high point, just about the same as last year. We still have a couple of sellers coming in at the 9,000, but you can see that then there's an 11,000 gap coming in here. 7.9 for the buyers. They still need a little bit more convincing, or they're still used to very cheap water-cooled CPUs, but this is a very high price. And then perhaps, of course, one warning, I did sell maybe in part, maybe unconsciously. I don't think it was conscious though, but this could happen again. Of course, we now have a nice expansion that's very well received. We do have a plan for expanding on the faction warfare accessibility. There are new ships. CCP, I think, has some momentum behind it, but winter then has often been like a little bit of a peak activity with a big war and things like that, and after that it's not always easy to maintain that momentum. So here we can see last year we went to that peak of 10k as well, and then we lost 50% 1.5 months later. So be careful as well, of course. But Wetware mainframes for now are doing another 1-year high point at 2.2 million, 2.1 million for the buyers. Again, showing that pretty damn strong demand that to me has been confirmed to come from capital ship production in Nosek. Next up here are the advanced bow materials, 2920. like that. We'll go through these, but as you know, at this point we can expect a bit of a bottom to start to form on these, because CCP has cut yields from Moon Mining, or will cut yields from Moon Mining by 25%. That's pretty damn significant, but also not totally unexpected if you followed my logic from several months at this point. Didn't mention it every single week, but my position was still that the value proposition for Tech 2 was just starting to become a little bit too powerful, and that eventually CCP might intervene. If you cut supplies for Moon Mines by 25%, you're increasing prices. That's really good to keep the value. That was the stated goal there, to keep the value for people that mine their moons, to maintain some value there. That should also ripple right through to the Tech 2 ships that should become more expensive again as well. Let's get started. Here is crystalline carbonite, and market response is absolutely immediate on this one. So this is not a normal average increase, right? This will probably form a real bottom in crystalline carbonite. So I bought a couple of small batches. I was always a little bit hesitant, and I've got more Tech 2 ship investments than advanced moonmat investments, but those that did take the gamble will be very happy, of course, as we were well below 125 last week. 170 for the sellers, 160 for the buyers. Basically also very close to a full recovery on the 1 year basis. Next is for Caldari. Here we go. Titanium carbide, right? Same story, although a little bit more muted, but definitely a breakout from the previous range of basically the last 10 months or so. 162 for the sellers, 160 for the buyers. Then for Minmatar, it's Fernite carbide. That's actually a little bit of a surprise. We actually got a spike in November that managed to get us to 125, and not doing that well here, 128 to 113. Now, there is a chart. I didn't see the article itself, but on the subreddit that basically just came out about usage of ships, and of course the Munin has basically been nerfed into the ground. The Munin meta is gone, and that was a big reason why a Minmatar ship was being massively produced, massively used for the smallest, least popular faction, but in my opinion most hardcore faction in EVE Online. We always had these lower prices, lower interest in their ships, just because there are fewer players playing the Minmatar race or the Minmatar faction. Gotta be careful with words, of course, these days. But yeah, here a more muted response to the announcement, and I think it's in part because basically there's no need to go all out in Munin production anymore. And then finally for Amar, here is the tungsten carbide. Also a little bit of a smaller reaction, but it's definitely there as we went up to 135 now for the sellers, 125 for the buyers. So for the carbides, yeah, definitely in Galente and Caldari, I would say in numbers probably the two most played factions. We got a very big response, a little bit less in Minmatar Amar. Then our metamaterials, starting with Galente. Here are the photonic metamaterials. Immediate response here as well, of course. We were below 7,500 disc. We're at 11,500 for the sellers, 10.8 for the buyers. So that is not a full recovery, but definitely that 25%, and then you make some calculations probably to decide on a certain new price range. Look at the volumes as well. Lots of vultures that jumped on the occasion to still grab a little bit of cheap advanced metamaterials, looking to eke out that quick profit. And then we've got our Caldari non-linear metamaterials. Ooh, to my surprise, we get the volume, but we don't get the big price spike. Well, that's because it's already a little bit in range of this price. 11,500 for the sellers, 11,300 for the buyers. And then let's see if again we've got a little bit less response in Minmatar, plasmonic metamaterials. Yeah, another bump. It's again to the 12.5, but on the 1 year chart it looks less impressive. 13.5 now for the sellers. A little bit of a supply problem already showing up here, but the difference here, right, if you go for the Galente one again, which is this one, you can see a clear breakout, nothing we've seen in 10-11 months. Not a peak yet either, but definitely a very substantial recovery from the price. And then the Minmatar one, well, this spike here pales in comparison to even what we've had a couple of months ago here, May, July, and then where we started off a year ago. And the reason for that is the munin, right? That extra huge demand for the munin that gave this massive boost to plasmonic metamaterials. Terahertz metamaterials for Marden, we have a response, but also a little bit less than the others. And maybe also something, if you guys remember, many months ago, one thing that I always also noted was that the Amar ones are far more stable than all the others. Less spiky, less trade opportunity, way more stable. Well, here again, we do have the response. We are probably forming a bottom, but at this point, it's only like a 6-month bottom, whereas again our Galente ones, yeah, kind of a real recovery happening right here in very short order. Let's see if the others are responding as well. Here are fermionic condensates. Yep, that's very clearly going to form a bottom. Market expecting, well, doesn't know. We're just out of fermionic condensates on the sellers. Buyers willing to go up to 46,000. That's definitely the highest price in 8 months here. Then we get our ferrogel, bit of a bump, but already supplies starting to say, hey, don't. So here we just don't have the supplies to stop what's happening. For ferrogel, we do already have profit takers that are keeping things in check. Definitely a bit of a mixed picture here. Fluorides just above 500, but nothing too crazy. Hypersynaptic fibers, 6-month bottom maybe at 6250 on the chart. Nanotransistors also already being stopped by supplies. That's really interesting. And then we get phenolic composites, our first 1-year high point in advanced materials. That's been a very long time since we've been able to say that. 1800 for the sellers, 1545 for the buyers. So if you bought down here close to the bottom, you could super easily have bought well below 1000 disc, but maybe even something like an 850, 1000 disc profit over 100% right here in 3 months. Not bad at all, of course. Pressurized oxidizers back above 10k. I don't think we're gonna lose that too hard or too quickly anymore. Then we get reinforced carbon fiber, full recovery back to 12,500. And finally, ceramic fibers that actually already had that bump here September, October, and was back at the 300 range and is able to stay there. So for those of you guys that basically theorized, right, I thought maybe they would do something to take 2 ships, right, maybe nerf them or something else, but no, they went the resource route on this one. 25% less yields from the moons, and so a big part of the most immediate response, of course, is in the advanced moon materials. It's noticeable across the board, and you can of course expect this to be a structural change, a new price range that will be found, and a real bottom that will be created because of this. The CCP intervention is here. Let's keep in mind this may not be the last one. Let's take a look at the impact on Tech 2 ships then. 3745. Like that, and let's get going with the Basilisk. All right, a little bit of a response, but not by all that much. 123 to 115 million is still very cheap. Then we get the Cerberus, definitely a bit of a response as well, but yeah, I wouldn't call this going crazy for Tech 2 ships just yet. 145 million to 131 million. I think we'll, oh no, actually even the Curse that already had a nice recovery up to above 150 is continuing its downtrend right here. So Curse going for 146 to 132. Then we get the Damnation now back above 250, 263 for the sellers, 240 still for the buyers, so not that many buyers. The Deacon even declining as well over the last week, 14 to 12 million. Next here we've got the Eagle part of the meta, right? I think here we will start to see a big difference between what's part of the meta and what is less of a daily driver in nullsec. Here we do have a real response, so you could have bought these for 110 million. Now they are selling for 139, so it's still not that much. And then we get 126 million for the buyers. Next here is the EOS that was already recovering as well and has now made its way back up to 317 million, 275 for the buyers. Now I kind of regret not buying a couple extra. because I bought one at 254, and then I could have bought one at like 240 or something like that pretty easily in this period. I really noticed that. EOS, I really like it. I mean, it's Tech 2, you get the resistances, etc. But if I'm not mistaken, it also has, yeah, there we go, the 125 for drone bandwidth, which means that it can field, it's a battlecruiser that can field 5 heavy drones, and that's actually a lot of firepower. Together with the Tech 2 tank, you do have a very nice and versatile ship right there. So 300 million ISK, 370 now for the sellers. We'll probably start to see a little bit more volatility as players decide if they want to take profits or if they need to wait for better prices later down the line. The Ares, yeah, definitely declining. Look at these volumes, maybe a bit of a dump or something like that. 42 for the sellers, 30 million for the buyers. I would say if you're still looking for that Tech 2 investment, and this really should be the time to do so, considering what's brewing in advanced movements, Ares 30 million, definitely looking pretty juicy. Flycatcher going up a little bit, but nothing too crazy. 43 to 36 million. So you're still really pretty low on the buyers if you want. But the general trend so far, though, you can see here 5 daily averages, above 5 day, above 20 day. That makes it a period where it's very difficult to get the buy orders to trigger. You may have to go quite aggressive for that to happen. Guardian, right? Definitely part of the meta. If you need a logistics wing, has a real response here as well. You could have bought these for less than 100 million on a couple of occasions. Not even that long ago, 100 million must have been possible. We're at 133, 121 million for the buyers. So they are realizing, yeah, we're not gonna try to get to 100 million anymore. That's just not gonna happen. Heretic then, are the buyers still close to 30 million? Yep, so it looks like the interdictors are really struggling, and we maybe even had a little bit of a dump happening here across the board in interdictors. So there's like a slight buy opportunity if you have the patience, of course, to then buy later down the line. Look at that, Hound still below 15 million, definitely stopping. So if you want your Hound below 15 million or a couple, I'd go up to 4 myself, then this is the time to do so. And you know that stealth bombers have that volatility potential. You can now see what's happening in advanced movements. Our next spike could be quite juicy. Ikitursa, 500-ish. I mean, it's to keep an eye on the Triglavian stuff, 550 to 500 million. Oh, we're back above 500, so a little bit more expensive. Here is the Ishtar. All right, looks like maybe a little bit more people use the Ishtar than what I realized, or it's just also that available that it feels like it's very stable and that it went very low with little interest, but it actually has a relatively noticeable bump that brought it to the highest price in, well, 7 months or so. 160 million for the sellers, 155 for the buyers. 5 heavy drones on a cruiser is definitely pretty good as well, though. Next here is the Kirin continuing to decline, so if you're still looking for that, buy. Try to buy Kirin below 15 million, should still be doable. Manticore, same story. You can see that we had a spike. You see that we are playing with the low points yet again. 17 million to just below 16, so you get a super narrow range. You're basically grabbing a very cheap Manticores at the moment. It's something I'm definitely gonna consider myself. Quick trip to Jeddah, buy some stuff. We're apparently a little bit late for the Nemesis. You can see here that we have crossed the range, 14 to 13 million, so it's still relatively cheap, but I think it's gonna just be harder to not have to buy very close to that 14 million rather than close to 13 million. Nighthawk staying pretty low as well, actually really cool ship PvE wise as well. 251, I bought my most of my command ships above 250, so I think you could still do that. We're still on the right side on the chart as well. Onero's going back above 130, so here, right, mentioned these as well. I think buy these below 100 million for a logistics cruiser. Did feel a little bit crazy again in that value proposition, a lot of hull capability for the ISK, and so now here 30% extra, and I don't think we'll see price below 100 million again anytime soon. Purifier, just too late as well. Not a big breakout, but Again, if you want to invest in your purifiers, you're probably too late. You're much better off with charts like the Hound here. That's pretty good. Then we've got the Rook. Yeah, we can see how those minimum prices are starting to go back up here. So you're still buying one below 150 million, but harder and harder to do. Saber, a little bit of a bump here, was at the 1 year low points, and I did mention it last week that it looked pretty good to make an investment. So let's say that you could have bought one for like 36 million. You're selling them for 40 at this point. It's not huge, but it is a 10% change. Then we get the Scalpel, yeah, too low in volumes in my opinion. Scimitar, very unnoticed here, 131 to 115. So maybe one lagging logistics. You saw that for the Basilisk there's at least some response. For the Guardian there's definitely a response. So maybe the Scimitar is like lagging behind a little bit, but it's not the bottom price, of course. Then we've got our Sleipnir, still not doing that well. Can we still buy him below 250? No, 260 now for the buyers. They've closed that window. Next here is the Vagabond, big volumes as well, not a big price response. And then finally the Zarmast, that is still in the 400 to 500 million range, still quite affordable, the Triglavian stuff in my opinion. Although it is of course a completely different ask when it comes to ponying up $500 million ISK for a single cruiser. Compared to everything else, again, hard to really justify. But alright, so the Take 2 ships, we got a little bit of a response, not huge, but on a couple of niche ships, of course, there is a much bigger response. And well, I did place most of my bets on the Take 2 ship market. I will definitely make ISK. I think I could make ISK selling right now on a lot of them, but my hope is that eventually, right, this decreased supply in advanced boom materials and an increased price for Take 2 ships will also potentially increase the interest in Take 2 ships a little bit more, and that will start to see more volatility that is tradable, because that has always been my go-to for shorter term trades. Take 2 ships have always been really good for that. Next up, Take 3 ships, 4640. There we go. Let's start as always with the destroyers, but I don't expect much here. So you can see the Confessor, very narrow band, moving back down a little bit over the week, 48 to 43 million. Volumes are terrible. Next is the Hecate. You can see the range here, just absolutely nothing, just above 50 for the Hecate. 51 to 46, and volumes, well, a little bit better than the Confessor, I believe. Yeah, definitely better than the Confessor, but it's just so stable. Hard to say that I want to trade here. All right, Jackdaw, first little bit of a drop, and are we really buying them below 45? Just at 45 for the buyers, 48 million for the sellers. Really a little bit of lack of interest in the ship that is coming through here and pushing prices down a little bit. If you absolutely want to basically grab one because you want to use it, that would be my advice, but for active trading I'd be very careful. And then finally this Vepel, look again at that stability, that range between sellers and buyers, those very bad volumes. It's not exactly too promising. 42.7 million for the sellers, 41.1 million for the buyers, and honestly no signs that this is going anywhere. Then we get the cruisers. Here is the Legion, so that was a little bit better. We're starting to see buyers drop off a little bit and sometimes being able to put pressure on the price. Look at that average here, definitely dropping off, but at the moment the Legion is still very expensive. 199 million for the sellers, 184 for the buyers. So this is still not the time to buy but to sell. The Loki then also going back up to a 200 million range, 202 for 184. Perhaps, you know, with the shake-up now as well with Take 2, there is possibility that some Take 3 cruisers will be moving into higher ranges. Then we got a Proteus though, that one is starting to seriously decline, went up to 230 million. If I'm not mistaken, a lot of players are speculating that this is part of the prep for the Winter Nexus event that should be coming as well. I can definitely see that. Then I think we just need a little bit of patience, right? This is extra Legion demand because of the Winter Nexus, extra Loki demand coming in as well because the Legion is so expensive, extra Proteus demand here as well. I think it has its uses in potentially the Winter Nexus, things like that as well. This one has already started to decline, and then the Tengu is actually pretty average, which I'm surprised by. I think it's a great PvE platform, but it's still a 190 to 176. Yeah, I would say, in all likeliness, we have to wait for the event, and then maybe next year we'll see a real decline in price and another buy opportunity. Yeah, there is trade potential, in my opinion, in the Tech 3 cruisers, like here for the Legion. And I hadn't thought about that angle, but it's absolutely true that for some events, a Tech 3 cruiser is actually like the best ship that you can get. And the Legion has been that on a couple of occasions. So there we go. Tech 3 ships, yeah, sell if you need to take a profit. Buying at the moment, I think a little bit too early across the board, even though the Proteus is declining rapidly. And then finally, the extra product for the week. I'm gonna try to take a look at something I haven't done before, which is the boosters. I think I saw that in a comment, not on an Eve Talk, but a Sunday recap. So let's see what we can make of it. 50-20. Booster market. So that's in implants and boosters, and then here are the boosters. We got booster slots as well, and then we do have quite a few different categories, but let's just get a feel here. Oof, I'm not even sure what this does, but at 30 million a pop, it's quite expensive, or a pill, I should say. Anti-pharmacon stuff here also 32 million, and definitely rather expensive, above average, and that one just below 30 million, but I would still call this relatively expensive. Let's take a look at some blue pills. Blue pill booster, 5 million, just had a spike up to 7 million, so there's definitely some volatility to be seen here as well. Look at that here as well. Normal average price 2 million or so, maybe average, and then here a spike up to 5, maybe even 6 million, and we are having a spike in, yeah, not even gonna pronounce that, guys. Just take a look at the market yourself. 2.7 million, couple coming in already though. Going to squash this quickly. Standard blue pill, pretty expensive at 3 million at the moment as well. 25 million for a strong, and then, oops, misclicked, sorry about that, a synth, also a little bit more interest and price, so going for 2.7 million. Let me know in the comments, is this more action for nullsec? Does this have to do with maybe events that are happening? Maybe faction warfare? Have they become a big proponent of the boosters? It's a possibility. We'll go through the rest of the list a little bit more quickly and just get a feel. So it looks like the Exile boosters are less expensive than the blue pills. So these are, oh, except for the Synth Exile booster, that's actually a little bit more expensive on the 1 year chart. So a little bit more mixed here. Blue pills are definitely expensive. Our Mind Floods are, damn, bad chart on this one. I'd say not that expensive at 5 million. Not that expensive either. Yeah, 25 million for a strong. So strong boosters are definitely quite valuable. And we just had a little bit of a spike in the Synth Mind Flood as well. Interesting. Maybe that's like the big nullsec battle or something like that. Quave Zero Classic, not producible, I think, going for 30 million at the moment. Quave Zero Green Apple going for 13 million, definitely pretty expensive, but this is, I think, like a unique item that can't be produced. That's their chart. And then the Extinct Boosters, 7.5, 2.5 inexpensive. 20 million. I'd actually say that the strong one here is less expensive than most of the others. Definitely really bad in volumes. And then the Synth version, a little bit above average. Nothing too crazy. Alright, let's browse through slot number 2. Oh, that's a little bit less to do. That's 30 million for this one again. Just had a spike here in the improved drop booster. That one's not too expensive, that's average. And just had a spike here as well to 4 million for the Synth drop booster. Frantic stuff is actually inexpensive. Yep, there we go. Right. Soothsayer. Bit of a spike here as well. So this goes from 700,000 up to 1.5 million. That's a 100% boost. That's not bad. So there's definitely a bit of a November boost. And look at this here as well. Starts at 1 million, ends at 2.5 million. That's actually really interesting. Maybe I'll at some point need to look into booster production or maybe booster trading, because we're definitely seeing some pretty high prices. Oh, maybe there's like PvP events and things like that that can be a part of the equation here as well. Very, very interesting actually. Now that I'm looking through it. Now it's a very big list, and we'll try to go hard shell. I think we can see that from drops 30 million. Or is that 300,000? Yeah, 300,000. There we go. I thought that was never making me that happy. Agency hard shell going for 5 million. Very expensive agency hard shell TB7 dose 3, and then the dose 4 goes for 50 million. But again, look at that volatility here. Buy for just above 30, sell for 50. Buy below 40, sell for 50. That is definitely interesting. Overclocker stuff. Here again, buy below 4, sell above 5 in just 10 days. And some of them very expensive at the moment. So if you have some lying around, I think you can look into selling. Basically, I definitely have some pyro lances lying around. Look at that here. 94 million for an HC pyro lance dose 4. Very, very expensive. Man, an ignored market, but I would have to find a way to incorporate that, because you can see here it's very diverse here. We've got anti-disruptor boosters. It really looks like they're new. Not sure where this comes from, what this does. Then Velar booster is inexpensive, and then again some more anti-drone boosters that are actually getting more and more expensive quickly. That's a very unusual launch chart. You can see that it doesn't exist that long, a couple of months basically, if that. But we actually have an increasing price up to, well, there's nothing available, but 50 million for the buyers, and sales happening above 150 million. That's interesting. Harvester stuff, very bad charts. Tetrimon capacitor boosters. Here is actually an expensive one again as well. Okay. The booster gameplay. I never play really with boosters, so I'm more like they drop in an event, they're useful, alright, I use them, but I never really like have them in my cargo slot or anything like that. But perhaps I'll need to educate myself. And these boosters, they're definitely like new. Not sure what to do with that. And then finally we get the clone mapper, also a little bit all over the place, but the volumes are not really tradable. This has to do with that recloner that can basically keep you on the field even after you get botted. Basically get into your new ship, into a capital ship that has the recloner capability. So yeah, the boosters, a lot of them are very high. So if you have some stuff lying around, could be interesting to be selling at the moment, and definitely has surprisingly interesting volatility there. Not sure what I'll do with it. Maybe that would need to become like a completely separate video, including what's needed, which ones drop, what do they do. Definitely needs a little bit more research, but admittedly it has a lot of potential. We'll see if I can find the time for anything like that. But for now, that's going to be it for this Eve Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.